now joined by Gregory Whetstone, President and CEO of the American Council on Renewable Energy, a US national nonprofit that unites finance, policy, and technology with the aim to accelerate the transition to a renewable energy economy. Greg, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I mean, let's jump straight into it. We see renewable energy is on the rise, and we've seen resilience in the face of the pandemic, whilst other fuels have been dropping and kind of falling away. So why renewable energy? Why now? And what does the roadmap for US renewables look like? How do we drive growth going forward?
Yeah, big question. Why renewable energy? Why now? First of all, the economies are working. Renewable energy is in most of the country and in a lot of the world the cheapest source of new electricity, without question. So the economics are working, and there is a compelling reason to move away from traditional fossil energy sources as the evidence on climate change has continued to mount, increasing urgency. And obviously we have a new administration in the United States that is very much focused on addressing the climate problem and understands that renewable energy is really at the heart of both the effort to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and the effort to drive an American economic recovery. And we feel like we're very fortunate that our sector is well positioned to play both roles. So we're poised for growth. We have, as you mentioned, been really growing hand over fist, even through the pandemic, even through the less than supportive policies of the Trump administration. And we see an opportunity to accelerate our growth even more rapidly. We grew at around $55 billion a year, and last year and the year prior. That's been the trajectory. So the numbers are big. Our ability to drive economic growth is proven. And what we need to do now is really take it to an even bigger scale. And you see the administration and the Congress very focused on ways to do that.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, this new administration, there's been a huge amount of talk already and promise of action and a lot of excitement as well, I think, amongst people who are working in this space. So interested to know kind of, what do you think so far is the most kind of significant thing that's actually happened, some of that rhetoric that has turned into action within these first few hundred days of the Biden administration? Yeah,
there's been a lot. I mean, it's cheating a little bit, I guess, but I want to say the announcement of an all-of-government approach. Sure. and really take an attack where we see the agencies involved in permitting, involved in research, involved in policy, involved in regulation, all really leaning in. We've seen massive increase in leasing of offshore wind resource and permitting decisions. I think we're looking at tremendous growth there. That's a sector that really was unable to get moving in the Trump era. And now we're looking at, I think it's going to be tens of billions and more in investment coming very rapidly. We're looking at a different approach to decision making, a new emphasis really on investing in the American grid to remake our national transmission infrastructure, which is in many important respects out of date. And proposals to really rewrite the nation's tax code in a way that's going to provide long-term support and certainty for the renewable sector, something we've never had. Our competitors in the fossil sector have had and still have incentives that have been on the books for over a century, over 100 years. And in the renewable sector, we've had incentives for a year or 2 years or at most 3 years, and then they phase out and we got to battle to get them back again. So we're looking at proposals for 5 or 10 years, certainly, which for us would be a big step forward for wind and solar power, energy storage, transmission. These are the areas we know we need to invest, and we know that will precipitate tremendous economic growth and allow us to make big headway in reducing greenhouse emissions in this country.
Sure. And I mean, it's interesting you talked about kind of cohesion piece, and I do want to come back to your comments on the grid as well. But before that, at the heart of this plan, we're seeing kind of that promise to invest $2 trillion in clean energy. We've also seen, some success with the Q45 tax code, as well as, your own initiative at ACOR around the 1T 2030 goals. So in that context, do we pay for this? If so, how do we pay for this? And if so, who should pay for this stimulus and this investment in the clean technology space?
Yeah, a lot of this investment is investment that is going to be repaid, that's going to save consumers money and lower electricity bills. So, for example, the transmission investment that we're talking about would pay for itself more than twice over, and reduced cost of electricity by allowing consumers to be able to access low-cost renewable energy that they can't get now simply because the transmission lines are not there. The question of whether and how we pay for a tax package, which is, is part of what this is not one that we and our members are going to jump into. Congress will address that, decide whether to pay for it, where to pay for it. Certainly there are proposals that suggest you can help pay for it by eliminating the current subsidies for fossil fuels. That's in some of the legislation. Certainly those who insist that our incentives should be phasing down and out should be looking at incentives in other areas like fossil fuels as well, and that will indeed pay for some of the cost here.
Sure, yeah, and that's fair enough. I think we've touched on already, and it's a massive kind of topic at the moment, is that need to kind of electrify more electrons. We keep kind of hear people saying, and a lot of the transition seems to come back to this. But at the same time, we're seeing estimates that for every $2 that we spend, every $1 that we spend on renewables, we'll need $2 of investment into the grid and into that kind of electricity infrastructure. So again, what does that look like? How do we get that investment into that physical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, one way is, really, we're going to need a lot of private capital. We know that. That's what's powered our growth, and that's still going to be the lion's share of the investment. But our nation's grid, we need to incentivize that investment, particularly big interregional high voltage transmission. The incentives really aren't there right now for that. There are proposals that would provide a tax credit that could make a huge difference there. And those proposals, I think, are a big part of the infrastructure investment we need. And to be clear, it's not just for renewables and climate change. We need it for competitiveness. Other countries, other parts of the world are making those investments now. We're calling for what we call a macro grid, a big interregional connected grid in this country. China's investing in that now. Big parts of Europe and in South America, we're seeing those kind of investments. We need to do that in this country. In the U.S., parts of our grid really go back to the 1950s and are not taking advantage of technologies that are available today that allow electricity to move much more efficiently than what we have. And we need to better connect the parts of this country that have the best renewable resource with the parts of the country that have the greatest demand for electricity. A lot of the grid is a legacy from the days that it was built to connect either to the hydro facilities, really in the early part of the 1900s, when we built some in the 1920s and 30s, built the big hydro projects. And then there was a phase in this country where it connected to where the big coal seams and coal powered was. We're moving past that now. We need to connect to where the pollution-free, inexpensive power is, and use that to drive economic growth and create jobs, grow our economy, and get serious about the climate problem. The time is past due.
Sure. Yeah, and we've been looking at kind of that macro grid initiative that you've been working on. So interested to hear a bit more about that as well. You talk to those technologies that do the technologies that we need for something like the macro grid, do they exist? Do we need more R&D? Kind of what does that roadmap look like, Greg?
Yeah, clearly we can use more R&D in a range of areas to make energy storage more cost effective, but it's continuing to improve now in the marketplace to build find ways to lower the cost for, say, high voltage DC transmission. So, but we don't need any big breakthroughs, and we really have the technology today to get it done. So the research is important and should continue for the next evolution. But a lot of the emphasis now should be on deploying the technology we have today. We know how to do it, and we know how to do it cost effectively. So it's time to start getting serious about deploying the technology we built through the years. We have now demonstrated an ability to be effective at scale, to be competitive economically at scale. And in fact, we're competing against natural gas at near record low prices very successfully. We saw record deployment of renewable power in 2020, over 33 gigawatts of new wind and solar power brought online, which is a record, and a record by a lot. The previous record was more like 23 gigawatts. So this is almost a 50% increase over the record, despite the pandemic, despite the policies of the Trump administration, with tariffs that came in and out and changed a lot, and lack of predictability and stability, many of, factors that made things tough for business. We still saw tremendous growth, and we see the demand there for more renewable power. We see the ability to achieve that growth more and more. We have corporate America relying on renewable power, not just because it's better for the environment and what their customers want, although that's clearly a big factor, but also because it's proven reliable and cost effective. And they know they can operate their data centers, their warehouses, their retail operations. So we see more and more of that happening, their manufacturing processes. And that's really where the sector is going, is we've got to continue to grow more solar at homes, more solar at scale, and more utility scale wind, really providing power across the country, providing power from offshore, and improved grid. And that's going to get us a safer climate and lots more jobs and a better quality of life.
No, fascinating, Greg. I guess we haven't talked actually in detail about ACOR yet, and kind of cautious of the time as well. So do want to focus on that. I guess two parts to the question. The first, what role should associations and think tanks and not-profits play in driving forward the transition? And then, as a follow-up, what are you doing now? What is ACOR doing, and what do you think could be most impactful?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And certainly we believe that now is the time. This is the moment. If we're going to get serious about climate, this is the time to do it. And we see that role as really helping to educate the public and key policymakers about the impacts of proposals that would foster clean energy growth. And we want to advocate for the policies that allow us to achieve, we set a goal at ACOR of $1 trillion in private sector investment in the US in renewables and enabling technology by 2030. So starting in 2018, that's when we set it. We made good headway toward that goal, but we are behind. So we think we're going to need annual investment to average on the order of $90 billion, which is a lot. We're clicking along at more like 50 to 60 now. So that's a lot of growth, but we know we need to accelerate that to be within shouting distance of climate targets. So we're certainly advocating for the long-term tax platform and the changes in transmission and greater deployment of energy storage. We see those as the key ingredients. Getting there means we need streamlined siting. We need to take advantage of our resources that we have offshore in the US. We're really very lucky that we have renewable resources as abundant as we do here in this country. And we want to take full advantage of that. And I will say that we have recently surveyed investors in the space, and there's a tremendous amount of optimism about our ability to do that, to get there, to achieve that greater growth. We see our role at ACOR working with our membership, which goes really across the sector, across technologies, and across the transaction space. So we have the investors and the developers and the manufacturers and the electric utilities and the big corporate off-takers all working together to try to grow that renewable energy economy, because we know that's what we need. And there's tremendous potential there to create jobs along the way as we address climate change and also reduce the range of other pollutants that are associated today with our economic activity. And in this country, about a year ago, when we were all sheltering in place, we saw big dramatic improvements in air quality, really all up and down the eastern seaboard, the Midwest and the West Coast, just a tremendous change in our air quality. I'm pretty old and I'd never seen it like that in my life. It was a crippling economic cost to do it. We had to basically, it was a consequence of shutting down our economy. We can get to that same place with that same quality of life as we electrify our economy and power it with pollution-free energy and expand so that we've got clean transportation, electric vehicles, electric heating and cooling. And that's long-term, that's where we're going to go. And the benefits are immense, both from the standpoint of protecting our climate, which we've got to do. We know we have to do that for the long-term health, really, of our species, and also to improve our quality of life. So, this is the time we get to work on these. I feel very lucky that, we're engaging while these decisions are being made. So, and really the next, 3 to 6 months, will tell the tale. So if any of your listeners here that aren't part of ACOR, please come to acor.org and sign up. We appreciate the help and support and engagement.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we're hearing throughout. And again today is we have the tools and we have the sentiment. The time is now to act and to really drive this forward. So Greg, thank you for joining us today. We will continue to watch the work of ACOR closely and continue to work with you. So once again, thank you for joining us and sharing everything with us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Really appreciate it, Owen. Happy to do it anytime.
Thanks, Greg. Cheers. Bye-bye. Hello, we are now joined by Gregory Whetstone, President and CEO of the American Council on Renewable Energy, a US national nonprofit that unites finance, policy, and technology with the aim to accelerate the transition to a renewable energy economy. Greg, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I mean, let's jump straight into it. We see renewable energy is on the rise, and we've seen resilience in the face of the pandemic, whilst other fuels have been dropping and kind of falling away. So why renewable energy? Why now? And what does the roadmap for US renewables look like? How do we drive growth going forward?
Yeah, big question. Why renewable energy? Why now? First of all, the economies are working. Renewable energy is in most of the country and in a lot of the world the cheapest source of new electricity, without question. So the economics are working, and there is a compelling reason to move away from traditional fossil energy sources as the evidence on climate change has continued to mount, increasing urgency. And obviously we have a new administration in the United States that is very much focused on addressing the climate problem and understands that renewable energy is really at the heart of both the effort to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and the effort to drive an American economic recovery. And we feel like we're very fortunate that our sector is well positioned to play both roles. So we're poised for growth. We have, as you mentioned, been really growing hand over fist, even through the pandemic, even through the less than supportive policies of the Trump administration. And we see an opportunity to accelerate our growth even more rapidly. We grew at around $55 billion a year last year and the year prior. That's been the trajectory.